Episode 17, Tony Montana, The Rise and Fall of Scarface. Before there was El Chapo, before Netflix gave you Narcos, there was one man, a Cuban immigrant, a street hustler with nothing to lose. His name, Tony Montana. In the eyes of the world, he was just a fictional gangster, a Hollywood character with a gold chain and a machine gun. But to the streets, he was real, inspired by the drug wars of Miami, fueled by the violence of real cartels, and built on the ashes of the American dream. This is not just the story of Scarface. This is the rise and fall of a man who wanted the world and nearly got it. Power, greed, betrayal, cocaine empires, and blood-soaked luxury. Welcome to Episode 17, Tony Montana, The Rise and Fall of Scarface. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and join the family. We've got room for one more soldier. Let's get started. Tony Montana was more than a movie character. He was the mirror of a broken system, where the American dream was sold like a drug. Born in Havana, raised in violence, he learned early, power came from fear, not respect. He didn't want freedom, he wanted control. And in Miami, he saw his chance. America didn't see him coming, a nobody with nothing to lose. But Tony saw it all, the mansions, the clubs, the piles of money. He believed it all could be his. All he had to do was kill, betray, and survive. And that he was good at. Tony Montana's first steps into America weren't glamorous, they were desperate. He came in through the Mariel boat lift of 1980, alongside over 100,000 Cuban refugees. But Tony wasn't like most of them. He wasn't looking for safety, he was looking for power. Thrown into a refugee camp, labeled a criminal, he had one thing on his mind: get out and rise fast. He got his break in the form of blood, a contract hit on a former Cuban official in exchange for a green card. Tony didn't hesitate. One kill, one paper, and he was on the streets of Miami. That's where it began. Dishwashing by day, plotting by night. Tony wasn't patient, and in Miami's cocaine boom, impatience was the perfect weapon. Tony's rise wasn't slow. It was explosive. The moment he proved himself in a bloody motel deal gone wrong, the streets started whispering his name. He didn't flinch. He didn't run. He handled business. Brutal, precise, cold. That's what Frank Lopez saw in him. A seasoned drug lord, calm and calculated, Frank brought Tony into the real game. No more small runs, no more street hustling. Now it was penthouses, offshore accounts, and shipments worth millions. Tony started wearing suits, driving Cadillacs, eating in gold-plated restaurants. But what he really wanted was the throne. And standing in his way, Frank Lopez, the man who brought him in, and the man Tony would eventually push out. Tony Montana wasn't built to be number two. Loyalty meant nothing when power was on the line. Frank Lopez made a mistake. He underestimated Tony. Thought the kid would stay grateful, obedient. He was wrong. Tony found a new connection. Sosa, a Bolivian drug baron with no time for weakness. Sosa saw Tony's hunger, and Tony saw his chance. When Frank tried to have him killed, Tony didn't panic. He turned the tables, ordered the hit, took Frank out like he was yesterday's garbage. In one bloody move, Tony took the empire. He had the money, he had the power, he even had Frank's girl. But what he didn't have was control. As fast as Tony climbed, the fall came faster. Cocaine wasn't just business anymore, it was personal. He started using more than he was moving. Paranoia, rage, delusions of being untouchable, it all hit at once. His empire grew reckless. The books were messy, the deals were sloppy. Sosa warned him, keep business clean, don't draw heat. But Tony couldn't help himself. When he refused to kill a journalist with kids in the car, Sosa saw it as betrayal. And betrayal in this game is a death sentence. The walls were closing in. The feds, the Colombians, his own people. Tony was surrounded, but he still thought he could win. The end didn't come quietly. It came with bullets, bodies, and a mountain of white powder. Tony's mansion turned into a war zone, one man against an army, coked out, broken, armed to the teeth. Say hello to my little friend. His final act of defiance became legend. But legends bleed. A single assassin slipped in through the back and ended it all with one silent shot to the spine. Tony Montana's body fell into his fountain beneath a golden globe that read, "The world is yours." And just like that, it wasn't. After Tony took down Frank Lopez, he wasn't just rich, he was untouchable. The cops were bought, the streets feared him, the clubs welcomed him with open arms. He turned Frank's empire into a gold mine, partnering with Sosa in Bolivia to move more cocaine than Miami had ever seen. Mansions, tigers, private security, even his bathtub was bigger than most people's living rooms. But all that wealth came with something else: isolation. The more Tony gained, the fewer people he could trust. Even his best friend Manny started looking like a threat. And paranoia, that became his closest friend. Saitige, Elvira was once Frank's woman. Now she was Tony's trophy. He gave her diamonds, dresses, a mansion, but he couldn't give her peace. His obsession with control, his temper, his coke-fueled rants, it all pushed her away. Elvira wasn't in love with Tony. She was surviving him. At one dinner, in front of the entire restaurant, he exploded, yelling, accusing, humiliating her. She left that night, and she never came back. Tony didn't chase her. He couldn't, because deep down, he knew he wasn't the man she needed. He was the storm she escaped from. Tony's paranoia wasn't just emotional, it was operational. He stopped trusting Sosa. He started suspecting Manny. He even questioned Gina, his own sister. Manny had fallen in love with Gina, but Tony didn't know. And when he found them together, he didn't ask questions. He shot Manny in cold blood. Moments later, Gina screamed the truth. They were married. Tony had killed his best friend for nothing. That was the crack in his empire, the moment even he couldn't deny his madness. He held Gina in his arms, covered in blood, broken and shaking. And outside, the real storm was coming. Sosa was done being patient. Tony's refusal to follow orders, especially sparing the journalist, cost him millions. He sent a message. Tony was no longer protected. Dozens of armed men were flown into Miami, silent, trained, and ready to end Tony's reign. Meanwhile, Tony sat in his mansion, lost in a haze of coke, guilt, and ghosts. His empire was quiet now. His phone didn't ring. His people were either dead, missing, or afraid to be near him. He wasn't the king anymore, just a man sitting on a pile of powder waiting to die. And when the doors burst open, he didn't run. The gunfire lit up the mansion like a war zone. Tony roared back, twin M16s blazing, grenades flying. He took down wave after wave, screaming, bleeding, refusing to fall. "You want to f with me? You're f***ing with the best." His final stand became legend. He shot men down the staircase, off the balcony, across the courtyard. But there were too many. And Tony? He was already dead inside. The final shot didn't come from the front. It came from behind. Quiet, clean, ruthless. That's how kings fall in this world. The fountain gushed water like blood, and Tony's body floated beneath the golden statue that once promised everything. The world is yours. But for Tony, the world slipped through his fingers like sand. He came from nothing, built an empire, and in the end, he was just another name in a file, another body on a marble floor. Tony Montana wasn't real, but he represented something that was: greed, power, madness, the illusion of control. And that illusion always ends in blood. The aftermath was a massacre. Tony's mansion soaked in blood, bodies scattered through marble hallways and bullet-riddled walls. But outside, Miami kept moving. Another sunrise, another deal, another body forgotten. The news called it drug violence. The cops called it cartel war. But the streets knew better. Tony Montana wasn't just another dealer. He was a symbol of greed, ambition, and self-destruction. He didn't fall because he was weak. He fell because he thought he was invincible. In the days that followed, Sosa tightened his grip on Miami. The message was clear: obey or disappear. Tony had drawn too much heat from law enforcement, from rivals, even from within his own ranks. The empire he built didn't vanish. It just changed hands. His clubs were bought. His routes were taken. his money laundered through cleaner men. Tony's death wasn't a tragedy, it was a transfer of power. And in this world, power never goes to waste. It just waits for the next madman to pick it up. Years later, people still talk about him, not in boardrooms, not in police reports, but in whispers, in stories. Some say Tony was just a movie. Others say he was based on men like Mario Tabrao or the ghosts of the cocaine cowboys era. But anyone who's lived that life, who's moved weight, dodged bullets, or climbed too fast, knows. Tony Montana might be fiction, but he's also the truth. A cautionary tale written in gold chains and body bags. You see, power doesn't care how you get it, but it always tests how long you can hold it. Tony thought money made him bulletproof, that loyalty could be bought and fear could replace respect. But fear fades, money runs dry, and when you look in the mirror long enough, the devil looking back starts to look familiar. That's the part they never show, what happens after the throne. Because staying king costs more than becoming one. In the end, Tony Montana wasn't killed by Sosa. He was killed by Tony Montana. His pride, his paranoia, his hunger that could never be fed. He had the world in his hands and dropped it for a line of powder. That's the real Scarface story. Not the guns, not the gold, but the man behind the madness. The rise? That's the fantasy. The fall? That's the price. And now, his story lives in posters, in rap lyrics, in dorm room walls. They remember the suits, the swagger, the mansion. But the truth? The real Tony? He died alone, high, haunted, hated. And no empire, no matter how rich or ruthless, can save a man from himself. Tony Montana didn't just lose the world, he proved that the world was never his to begin with. After Tony's death, silence filled the mansion. The music stopped, the fountain ran red, and the only sound left was the echo of his final words. The world he ruled for a moment went back to business as usual. No funerals, no headlines, no flowers. Just another body for the cleaners to remove. That's how it works in the game. You shine, you burn, then you vanish. No legacy, no legend. Just a name whispered between deals. The DEA called it a win. The newspapers barely mentioned him. To the law, Tony Montana was just another dead trafficker. But to the streets, he was something else. A warning. The man who climbed too fast, played too loud, and died too messy. Every young hustler that watched Scarface saw the glory, but few understood the cost. Because the truth is, the world might be yours, but only for a second. Tony's story became myth. Not because he was the best, but because he dared to be the loudest. The suits, the rage, the gold guns. He played the gangster like a movie star, and he died like one too. Explosions, bullets, betrayal. It was Hollywood violence born from real blood. But every myth has a lesson, and Tony's was simple. If you build your house on cocaine, don't be surprised when it collapses. Even Sosa didn't celebrate the kill. To him, Tony was a failed investment, a tool that stopped working. There was no joy in his death, just another business problem cleaned up. That's the cold truth of the drug world. It doesn't reward loyalty, it doesn't punish evil, it only serves profit. And Tony, he stopped being profitable. So they erased him. No trial, no mercy, just silence. Today you see his face on t-shirts and murals and memes. He became the poster child for rebellion, but not redemption. The man who said, "I always tell the truth even when I lie," was lying to himself until the end. He wasn't a hero, he wasn't a villain. He was a reflection of what happens when ambition has no brakes and power has no soul. In every city there's another Tony, another kid who thinks they can take over the world with nothing but attitude and a weapon. But they forget the ending, they forget the pain, the silence, the empty room where the king once stood. Tony Montana didn't die because he was weak. He died because he thought he was too strong to fall. And in the world of kings, that's the biggest lie of all. Some say Tony died the moment he killed Manny. That wasn't just his best friend, that was his last link to humanity. After that, he wasn't living. He was surviving on rage, coke, and illusion. He stared at his empire and saw enemies everywhere. And when you see enemies in every shadow, eventually one of them becomes real. He didn't lose his empire to rivals, he lost it to himself, from the inside out. People remember the line, "Say hello to my little friend," but they forget what came after. Smoke, screams, bullets. Tony shot like a man possessed, but possession doesn't stop a bullet in the back. That final moment, he wasn't Scarface anymore, just a man with a hole in his soul. And the globe above him, "The world is yours," was already laughing. There's a reason Scarface still hits hard after all these years. It's not just the violence, the suits, or the soundtrack. It's the truth behind the madness. That no matter how high you climb, if you forget where you came from, you fall faster. Tony Montana didn't rise because of loyalty or strategy. He rose because he was willing to do what others wouldn't. And he fell for the exact same reason. There's no statues for drug lords, no parades, no goodbyes. When kings like Tony fall, they get erased, covered up by the next king, the next gang, the next body. But some names, they stick, not because they were great, but because they were unforgettable. Tony Montana was a ghost wrapped in gold, loud, flashy, doomed, and that made him immortal. Some kids still look up to him. They wear his face like armor, repeat his lines like scripture. But they don't know the truth. They don't know the fear, the betrayal, the silence before the shot. Tony Montana isn't a blueprint. He's a warning. Don't get so high on your empire that you forget where the edge is. You can find Tony Montana on posters, in rap lyrics, and street tattoos, but what most people miss is the tragedy behind the icon. He wasn't a king. He was a mirror, a reflection of what happens when hunger becomes obsession. He didn't fight for justice or loyalty. He fought for ego, and ego always has a body count. In the music world, Tony's image became currency. Rappers quoted him, hustlers idolized him, even CEOs bragged like him. "All I have in this world is my balls and my word." That line echoed through generations of street soldiers, but few ever questioned where those words led: a gold mansion and a blood-soaked ending. Leakage. The Scarface film wasn't just a movie, it was a prophecy, a tale about the cost of wanting too much too fast. Tony started with nothing and refused to settle. But sometimes the climb is what kills you. No brakes, no boundaries, no plan B, just ambition, bullets, and betray. Real gangsters watched Scarface in prison cells and corner shops. Some laughed, some nodded, some learned. Because while Tony was fiction, the rules were real. Power isolates, greed multiplies, and the fall is always louder than the rise. Even Sosa types knew it. The ones who stay alive are the ones who play quiet. If you strip away the guns and glitter, what's left? A scared kid with a scar on his face and something to prove. Tony Montana wasn't fearless. He was desperate. And desperation makes the loudest noise, right before the silence. In the end, Scarface wasn't about drugs or power. It was about a man chasing everything and catching nothing. There's a reason we're still talking about Tony today, not because he won, but because he lost bigger than anyone else. And when someone burns that bright, even for a moment, their story never dies. Tony Montana didn't leave behind an empire. He left behind a warning, and that warning is written in marble, bullets, and fire. And that's the story. Not just of a man, but of a myth that still echoes through every alley, every lyric, every ambition, too loud to whisper. Tony Montana rose like a rocket and burned out just as fast. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't follow the rules. And in the end, the world took everything back. But now you know the truth, the mob truth. If you're still here, you're not just a viewer, you're one of us now. Hit that subscribe button, join the family, and welcome to the crew, soldier. We've got more stories to tell, and we don't plan on stopping. This was episode 17, Tony Montana. Rest in power, Scarface.